Welcome to episode 92 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, we have kind of an unusual Toke Signals bud pick of the week this time. We have a big old shade leaf from California. I got this photo from a man named Wayne Wildman, and he tells me that is a 16-inch wheel there. He says he stuck the stem of the shade leaf right in the lug nut hole. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States this week, Obama plans to free scores of nonviolent drug prisoners. Aides expect the president sometime in the coming weeks to issue orders freeing dozens of federal prisoners locked up for nonviolent drug offenses. With the stroke of a pen, the president will likely commute more sentences at one time than has been done in half a century, since the days of LBJ. Flexing his clemency power is part of a bigger effort by the president to correct what he sees as the excesses of the tough-on-crime crowd, where politicians threw away the key even for minor criminals. With many Democrats and even Republicans now admitting the nation went too far, Obama holds the power to make a difference, especially for many young minority males who are disproportionately affected by biased enforcement of the drug laws. The total number of sentence commutations by Obama may surpass 80 in the coming weeks, but more than 30,000 federal inmates have come forward after his administration's call for clemency applications. A slow-as-molasses review process has advanced only a few of these, and just a tiny fraction have reached the president's desk for a signature. I think they honestly want to address some of the people who have been over-sentenced in the last 30 years, said Julie Stewart, founder and president of Families Against Mandatory Minimums. I'm not sure they envision that it would be as complicated as it is, but it has become more complicated whether it needs to be or not, and that's what has bogged down the process, she said. Republicans are also calling for changes in the criminal justice system, and the United States Sentencing Commission has revised guidelines for drug offenders, already retroactively reducing sentences for more than 9,500 inmates, nearly three-quarters of them black or Hispanic. It's a time when conservatives and liberals and libertarians and lots of different people on the political spectrum have come together in order to focus attention on excessive sentences, the costs and the like, and the need to correct some of those excesses, according to Neil Eggleston, the White House counsel who recommends clemency petitions to President Obama. So I think the president sees the commutations as a piece of that entire process, Eggleston said. Now, with the clock ticking on Obama's presidency, the White House has pressured the Department of Justice to send more applicants more quickly. Eggleston told the DOJ not to interpret guidelines too narrowly because it's up to the president to decide. If it seems like a close case, Eggleston told the DOJ to go ahead and send it over. The DOJ's pardon attorney, Deborah Leff, has told lawyers representing clemency candidates to hurry up and send more cases her way. If there is one message I want you to take away today, it's this: sooner is better, Leff said. Delaying is not helpful. Presidential commutations reduce sentences, but unlike pardons, do not eliminate convictions or restore civil rights lost as a result of those convictions. They represent an act of presidential forgiveness. As pointed out by Matt Agorist of the Free Thought Project on Alternet, until the undue political influence and fat campaign contributions of police unions, private prison corporations, alcohol and beer companies, big pharmaceutical corporations, and prison guard unions are addressed and reformed, the problem of mass incarceration will never be solved by a few commutations. Those prisons will keep filling back up much, much faster than sentences can be commuted. Also in the U.S. this week, a marijuana banking bill was introduced by a bipartisan group of senators. Senators Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado, Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado, Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, and Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, on Thursday, introduced the Marijuana Business Access to Banking Act, a bill that would allow banks to provide depository and other financial services to state legal marijuana businesses. Now, currently, because marijuana is illegal under federal law, both medical and non-medical marijuana businesses are unable to access banking services like any other business. Consequently, many cannabis businesses operate on a cash-only basis, leading to huge public safety issues as businesses become the target of robberies and are forced to hire armed security to protect their takings. One of the motivations for legalizing marijuana is to eliminate the black market and put marijuana in the hands of a legitimate regulated market, said Michael Collins, policy manager at Drug Policy Alliance's Office of National Affairs. Whether you are for or against legalization, you have to recognize that having marijuana businesses handling huge amounts of cash with nowhere to deposit the money is a public safety concern that Congress has to tackle. In addition to the obvious public safety concerns cited by federal, state, and local law enforcement officials, forcing these businesses to deal exclusively in cash makes it difficult for states to collect taxes, monitor transactions, and enforce regulations supported by voters, said Dan Riffle, federal policy director at Marijuana Policy Project. Allowing these businesses to access basic banking services is a critical step towards letting states regulate marijuana as they see fit without federal interference, a position virtually every serious contender for the 2016 presidential nomination has taken. Providing access to basic banking services for legitimate cannabis businesses should be a no-brainer, said Aaron Smith, executive director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. Without banks, many of our members are forced to operate entirely in cash, which puts their employees at risk for crime and creates massive challenges for businesses simply trying to pay their taxes, licensing fees, and other ordinary expenses. The legal marijuana industry is worth nearly $3 billion nationwide, Smith said. We shouldn't be forced to carry that around in duffel bags. Right now, it's the Wild West for marijuana businesses, said Major Neil Franklin, Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. Criminals know where the dispensaries are. They know the businesses are making thousands of dollars a day and that all of those transactions are in cash. It's led to some horrific incidents, Franklin said, all courtesy of the federal government. They're setting these businesses up to fail, and worse, they're endangering people's lives. Federal money laundering statutes and regulations intended to detect drug trafficking, terrorist activity, and other criminal acts have served as a major obstacle to state legal marijuana businesses. There are significant public safety concerns associated with businesses that cannot access banking services like other businesses. These companies are unable to accept credit card transactions and thus operate as cash only. As a result, operators of marijuana dispensaries, as well as the businesses themselves, have been targeted for robbery by violent criminals. These small businesses sink significant sums of money into security measures like armed guards, force sensors, panic buttons, because they're terrified of victimization as they handle substantial amounts of cash. The Marijuana Access to Banking Act would remedy this situation and ensure that state legal marijuana businesses can utilize the financial services necessary to provide protection and accountability for these businesses. The biggest crisis the cannabis industry faces is the lack of access to banking, according to Amy Margolis of the Oregon Cannabis Association. This is about public safety, fundamental economic fairness, and helping small, family-run businesses succeed. No licensed, compliant business should have to place themselves and their community in danger because they cannot open and maintain a bank account, Margolis said. This legislation allows businesses to flourish, create jobs, and maintain accurate bookkeeping while helping regulatory and enforcement agencies understand how these businesses operate. We're grateful to Senator Merkley for bringing together colleagues from both sides of the aisle to support a common-sense solution to the crisis currently vexing businesses and public officials in the 23 states with some form of legal marijuana, the NCIA's Smith said. This bipartisan support should make it clear to Senate leadership that this is a priority legislation that deserves to be moved on quickly and decisively. In California this week, federal agents raided a tribal marijuana farm and seized 12,000 plants. Dreams of a new era of federal tolerance of cannabis cultivation on Native American tribal lands took a big hit on Wednesday as law enforcement officers from at least 4 agencies raided land occupied by 2 tribes in California, seizing at least 12,000 plants and more than 100 pounds of processed marijuana. Other than contraband marijuana and items of evidentiary value, no tribal property was seized and no federal charges are pending, claimed U.S. Attorney Benjamin Wagner of the Eastern District of California. which includes Modoc County, where the raids occurred. Warrants signed on Tuesday by U.S. Magistrate Judge Carolyn K. Delaney gave federal agents the authority to search two large-scale marijuana cultivation facilities located on federally recognized tribal lands at the Alturas Indian Rancheria and the XL Ranch in Modoc County. The county is in the northeast corner of California, with Oregon directly to the north and Nevada directly to the east. An application signed by an agent for the Bureau of Indian Affairs claims that the chairman and vice chairman of the Alturas Rancheria, a tribe with just 5 members and 20 acres of land, told the Modoc County Sheriff back in March that they plan to start growing marijuana near a casino the tribe operates. The Federal Department of Justice had announced in December that Native American tribes may grow and sell cannabis if they follow the same public safety and non-diversion policies required of states that have legalized marijuana for medical or recreational use. Since that announcement, some of the 566 recognized Indian tribes in the United States have been considering the potential economic benefits of getting into the marijuana business. An affidavit filed in support of these warrants quotes 2 informants as telling sheriff's deputies the 2 cultivation sites are operated jointly with the owners of a large tobacco company in Canada. A member of the Alturas tribe has told county supervisors that the cannabis venture is financed by Jerry Montour, top officer and controlling shareholder of the Canadian business Grand River Enterprises, a billion-dollar manufacturer of tobacco products, according to the affidavit. The 2 informants claimed they saw Montour earlier this year on the Alturas Indian Rancheria in an area between a heavily guarded building housing the marijuana cultivation facility and the tribe's Desert Rose Casino. U.S. Attorney Wagner claimed he varied from his usual policy of declining comment upon ongoing investigations that haven't yet resulted in criminal charges, because the grows in question have received substantial attention in Modoc County, as has the U.S. Department of Justice's guidance relating to marijuana cultivation on tribal lands. The volume of marijuana that the XL facility alone was capable of producing, estimated at approximately 40,000 to 60,000 plants, far exceeds any prior known commercial marijuana grow operation anywhere within the 34-county Eastern District, Wagner said. According to tribal representatives, all of the marijuana cultivated at both facilities was intended to be distributed off tribal lands at various unidentified locations. As indicated in the search warrant affidavits, the investigation to date indicates both operations may have been financed by a third-party foreign national, Wagner said. The amount of marijuana being cultivated inside the Alturas Rancheria Event Center and in at least 40 greenhouses on Pitt River tribal land nearby suggested that neither federal conditions nor California's medical marijuana laws were being met, federal prosecutors and the affidavit claims. A law enforcement news release claimed the 2 grow operations appeared to have been operating in conjunction with each other and were well in excess of the locally enacted marijuana cultivation limits applicable to county land. The growing facility on the XL Ranch on Pitt River tribal land consisted of 40 newly constructed greenhouse structures, each of them capable of accommodating about 1,000 marijuana plants. An additional globe-roofed structure reportedly boosted the square footage by another 50%. Wagner claimed his office contacted representatives of both tribes on multiple occasions before Wednesday's raids and reminded them that cultivation of marijuana is illegal under federal law. Wagner claimed his office expressed concern to them that the large-scale commercial grows were operated in a manner that violates federal law, is not consistent with California's Compassionate Use Act, and undermines locally enacted marijuana regulations. The investigation of the cultivation facilities searched today indicates that both are commercial marijuana cultivation projects operated with the intent to transport large quantities of marijuana off tribal lands for distribution at various locations yet to be identified by the tribes, Wagner's office said in a statement. These facts raise multiple federal enforcement concerns, including the diversion of marijuana to places where it is not authorized. Federal authorities were asked to investigate the marijuana growing project by the sister of the Alturas Rancheria chairman, according to the affidavit. Wendy Del Rosa and her brother Philip Del Rosa have been fighting over the control of the tribe since 2012, the Sacramento Bee's Stephen Maganini reported earlier this year. Grand River Enterprises is the largest private employer on Ontario's Six Nations, the most populous reservation in Canada, and the only location of all 6 Iroquois nations. Montour, a 45-year-old member of the Mohawk tribe, lives in Hamilton, a port city on the western shore of Lake Ontario. In the U.S. this week, a bipartisan medical efficacy of marijuana amendment was introduced in the House of Representatives. Republican Congressman H. Morgan Griffith and Andy Harris, MD, and Democratic Congressman Sam Farr and Earl Blumenauer on Wednesday introduced the Credible Research on Medical Efficacy of Marijuana Amendment to the 21st Century Cures Act, or H.R. 6, which is currently scheduled to be considered on the House floor this week. The amendment focuses on removing barriers that inhibit research on marijuana. This amendment encourages the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, to work with the Drug Enforcement Administration to initiate and collaborate on research about the medical risks and benefits of marijuana. This does not change marijuana from a Schedule I drug, but does create a new subclassification within Schedule I, Schedule 1R, for marijuana that would make research easier to conduct. There has been little research into potential therapeutic benefits and risks of medical marijuana use, said Congressman Griffith. In many cases, research into specific relief it provides, how it can best be used, etc., has been obstructed by federal obstacles. This amendment is a responsible approach to increasing research and pursuing the answers to questions being asked by so many patients, doctors, researchers, and policymakers about medicinal marijuana, Griffith said. Our drug policy should be based on sound science, which is sorely lacking on the medical efficacy of marijuana, Dr. Harris said. We need science to clearly determine whether marijuana has medicinal benefits, and if so, what is the best way to gain those benefits. This amendment encourages more research and more collaboration in the study of marijuana by removing barriers currently in place, Dr. Harris said. Given the widespread use of medical marijuana, it is imperative that doctors better understand how it can be used to treat different people and conditions, as well as the risks involved, Congressman Blumenauer said. Our amendment shows members of Congress with widely varying views on marijuana policy are united in support of building a robust body of scientific information on medical marijuana. As more and more states pass medical marijuana laws, it is clear the federal government needs to rethink our federal policy, Congressman Farr said. Both sides of this issue agree that debate needs to be centered on science and not rhetoric. Allowing research to occur will give policymakers the information necessary to determine the proper role of medical marijuana in our country, Farr said. In Washington state this week, a rowdy news conference announces the closure of medical marijuana dispensaries. Now, prosecuting attorney Dan Satterberg and Sheriff John Urquhart must have envisioned quite a different news conference than the one which actually happened Wednesday morning when they announced the closure of medical marijuana dispensaries operating in King County. The medicinal cannabis dispensaries, which in some cases after years of smooth operation have now been suddenly defined as unlicensed in a money grab by I-502 recreational marijuana store operators, represent the only safe and affordable access to cannabinoid medicines for many limited mobility and low-income patients in King County. These dispensaries have to shut down in 30 days if they don't have a license. Oh, and did we mention that there aren't any licenses available? Satterberg and Urquhart, who have maybe expected to be hailed as heroes at their news conference, were joined by Russ Hoggy of the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board at the Sheriff's Office White Center storefront. But that's not how it happened. They were greeted by a vocally hostile crowd of about 30, with hecklers screaming at the prosecuting attorney and at the sheriff as they were trying to give their prepared speeches, which were rendered largely inaudible. "You are horrible people," one woman yelled at Satterberg. "If you have a license, you can sell. If you can't, you won't," Satterberg somewhat inarticulately told the hostile throng. "I'd like to take actual questions, not speeches," he responded with hostility of his own. 15 unlicensed medical marijuana dispensaries, no license for medical dispensaries as opposed to recreational shops is available, were sent letters informing them they don't have a state-approved license for the sale of marijuana and must close their stores, according to Satterberg and Urquhart. The only remaining legally licensed marijuana store in White Center is now Bud Nation, according to Bud Nation's Elizabeth Gordon. When I-502 was approved by voters in November 2012, it created a system for the licensed production, processing, and retail distribution of marijuana with no medical qualification needed. Patients were assured that recreational legalization wouldn't affect medical access. But it only took about 5 minutes after I-502 passed that would-be recreational marijuana merchants started eyeing those profits earned at medical marijuana dispensaries and scheming to reroute all that cash through their stores. With a little bit of convincing and a whole lot of campaign contributions, I-502 interests got the Washington legislature to fold in medical cannabis into the state's recreational licensing system, effectively eliminating collective gardens and dispensaries. Retail I-502 recreational operations now represent the only places licensed by the state of Washington to legally sell marijuana. That means operators of medical marijuana dispensaries, which have been providing safe access to patients for years in Washington state, especially in the Seattle area, are now subject to arrest and criminal sanctions, according to Soderbergh's office. That also means patients, who until now have been allowed to cultivate up to 15 plants for their own medicine, will soon be subject to arrest if they grow anything over 4 plants, if they aren't on a state registry, or 6 plants, if they agree to register with the state. In Texas this week, a Dallas woman raises awareness about the cite and release marijuana law. Now, Texas, many of you may not realize, has a law allowing law enforcement to write a ticket rather than taking someone to jail for less than 2 ounces of marijuana. That law's been on the books since 2007, but most cops statewide aren't using it. That's where Yvette Bazale, a graduate of the University of Houston, comes in. Bazale spends her days educating people about this law. Over the past week, I've spoken to 13 out of the 26 chiefs of police for all the cities in Dallas County, Yvette said. Balch Springs, Texas police are now trying the cite and release option. You make an arrest on it, then you have to process the marijuana, you have to put it into evidence or into the property room, said Lieutenant Mark Merritt with the Balch Springs Police Department. Plus, you go back and you have to file the paperwork, your arrest report for our police department, but then you also have to file all the paperwork to file charges through Dallas County. The cite and release bill was written by former state representative Jerry Madden of Plano back in 2007. We passed it as a voluntary law, Madden said. We knew it would be voluntary and we knew it would take time and we hoped it would gain strength, Madden said. But Texas law enforcement seemed to prefer to keep arresting people for pot rather than just writing them a ticket for it. Ron Stretcher, Director of Criminal Justice for Dallas County, claimed the cite and release isn't a good program. Cite and release is a tool that's been provided by the legislature that we've tried in Dallas County and did not find successful, Stretcher claimed. We found on those cases 60% of the people did not show up for court. Dallas County Commissioner Dr. Teresa Daniel said the county is continuing to look at alternatives to incarceration for low-level offenders, including small amounts of marijuana, through its new Stepping Up initiative. Are there certain activities that can happen before a person gets processed into the jail that would better serve not only the inmate, but families and taxpayers? Daniel asked. For her part, Yvette said she'd continue educating until cite and release is in full effect in Texas. In Chile this week, the country moved towards marijuana decriminalization. Now, while Chile is not seemingly ready for full legalization like their neighbors in Uruguay, the lower house of Congress there approved by a wide 68 to 39 margin a bill that would change the cannabis laws in this South American country. The lower house of Congress on Tuesday, to loud cheers from the public gallery, voted to push forward with marijuana law reform. This bill would allow possession of up to 10 grams of cannabis and the growing of up to 6 plants. Current marijuana penalties in Chile can get you up to 15 years in prison, according to the BBC. A health committee will now study the bill before the lower house again votes on each of its specific elements, and it will then go to the Senate. This vote was important, according to lawmaker Carol Cariola, part of President Michelle Bachelet's leftist coalition. It is a historic day for medicinal users who wish to stop being persecuted and be able to access a medicine that they can grow in their gardens, she said. Chile's capital city, Santiago, earlier this year was the site of Latin America's first medicinal cannabis farm with about 400 plants being kept in a guarded site. A government health agency will extract oil from the plants for use in a cancer treatment project for about 200 patients, who will all receive it for free. We're celebrating the overwhelming approval of this project, said Ana Maria Gazmuri, president of the Daya Foundation, a nonprofit that sponsors pain-relieving therapies, including Chile's first government-sponsored medicinal cannabis. This project is on the right path, and we're optimistic that it will be passed quickly. It should go through the Health Commission in a month at most, and ideally it should be approved by the Senate in 2 months. Gazmuri said. Surveys indicate Chile is higher in marijuana consumption than the rest of the region, with support for legalization increasing. Some polls have shown support as high as 86%. Before we go this month, there's a must-read on tokesignals.com. As you may be aware, the Grateful Dead played what they are saying is going to be their last concert ever this week at Soldier Field in Chicago. At those shows, the Grateful Dead's drummer, Bill Kreutzmann, wore a hemp t-shirt carrying a pro-hemp message. And you want to read about that on tokesignals.com. See you next week. Stay lifted.